Hampshire.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of Amendment 2255. And let me just say what we can't afford. What we can't afford is to read terrorists their Miranda rights and tell them they have the right to remain silent. Why can't we afford that? Because if we lose the opportunity to gather valuable information to protect our nation, then we can't prevent future attacks against the country. And here's the problem that we face. Here is the current head of Al-Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri. If we capture him tomorrow, I ask my colleagues this: do you want to send him to a secure detention facility where he can be fully interrogated under the laws of war and held there on detention of law of war authority? Or do you want to send him to a prison in the United States where we can't know? The legal questions are many, where there's a real risk that he will not be able to be held in law of war detention and will be told you have the right to remain silent, and we will lose opportunities to gather intelligence to protect our country. Now, my colleague from Illinois talked about the worst criminals that we put in prison. Well, I was a former murder prosecutor, and I put some of the worst murderers in prison, and there's a difference here. We're not dealing with criminals, we're dealing with terrorists. And the priority has to be to gather information and protect our country. And if we catch Zawahiri tomorrow, bring him to a prison near you, give him a lawyer, tell him you have the right to remain silent. Those legal questions are not dealt with if we adopt the alternative amendment that allows the administration to transfer people like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind of 9/11, to the United States. And what do we do with future captures like Zawahiri? How do we ensure that we can gather information? By the way, that is priceless. If we can stop a terrorist attack by interrogating someone, the price we can save for America, we can't put a number on that. And if you believe with a rising reentry rate of 29%, which is higher than last year, in terms of people we've had at Guantanamo, we've let go, but have gotten back in the fight against us, that we should weaken the standards that this administration has to meet to transfer people from Guantanamo to third-party countries, then that is essentially what is done in the defense authorization. My amendment will restore existing law to ensure that there are strong national security waivers the administration must meet before they transfer prisoners to countries where they're getting back in the fight against us, where they're getting out and getting back in, including against our troops. So this is a fundamental question. We cannot afford right now, with what is happening around the world, to close the one secure detention facility we have. That is clear. We can conduct law of war detention there. We still remain in a fight against terrorists. We can't treat them like common criminals, and that is what's at stake here. And if you believe that this man should come in a prison near you, that's not what I've heard from my constituents or the American people. And that's why my amendment will prohibit transfer of the mastermind of 9/11 to U.S. soil and keep him in Guantanamo, a top-rate detention facility that keeps terrorists, as opposed to common criminals, secure. And finally, I would say that as we look at the prohibition on Yemen, my amendment, and that is also co-sponsored by the ranking member of the Intelligence Committee and many other members in this chamber, would prevent transfers to the country of Yemen. Without my amendment, the administration can transfer to Yemen. What does that mean? Yemen is the head where Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is centered. We have actually had terrorists who have been released from Guantanamo and gotten back into Al-Qaeda leadership and been found in Yemen. And there have been prison breaks in Yemen. And yet, if my amendment is not adopted to keep the transfer prohibition to Yemen in place, the administration can transfer from Guantanamo to countries like Yemen, and the security waivers are weakened. The world is not a safer place from last year to this year, unfortunately. The re-engagement rate of Guantanamo prisoners has increased from last year to this year. So why are we weakening the national security provisions? Let's keep existing law in place. Why do we want to send Khalid Sheikh Mohammed to the United States of America when we have a secure facility at Guantanamo? And why do we want to take any risk that if we are blessed enough to have our men and women in uniform who do a fantastic job capture Zawahiri tomorrow, to risk at all that he may have to be told you have the right to remain silent because there are legal ambiguities when he is brought to this country, as opposed to law of war detention and interrogation in Guantanamo. That is what is at stake. And we cannot afford to think that we're no longer fighting a war against terrorists. We cannot afford to treat people like him like common criminals. As much as I believe in our criminal justice system, it was not created to gather intelligence, which is what we need to do to make sure that America remains safe. So I ask my colleagues to support Amendment 2255 that is co-sponsored also by Senator Chambliss, the ranking Republican on the Intelligence Committee, Senator Inhofe, the ranking Republican on the Armed Services Committee, as well as Senator Fisher, Rubio, and Barrasso. Thank you.
Time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. President.